I've been asked in comments on other videos how I go about deciding sort of start to finish what to do if I'm doing some kind of solo RPG adventure or episode or whatever you want to call it. And I decided that what I'm going to do for this video is basically an on-the-fly creation of a sci-fi solo RPG. I guess I'll call it adventure with as little side editing as possible. I'm just going to walk you through what I do and how it happens. And the very first decision that one has to make, and which I have already made off camera, is what system to use. And in this particular case, for this video, I'm going to use something that I have not done before. I've read through these rules. This is the Hulks and Horrors Basic Black Edition, a science fiction role-playing game by John S. Berry III, and I will show you the credits inside. I have to say, I think this is one of the worst unfortunate titles for something in terms of the content, but I guess there's a reason for it. I don't find it particularly evocative or appropriate to the content ultimately, but these are the credits, and I am going, this is the rule book here. I'm going to be working as much as possible, or maybe solely almost, within what you see here, and the video is going to just sort of demonstrate my thought process and what I do to make decisions along the way that ends up with the adventure that I'm going to run, or the story that I'm going to run. And there certainly will be some stuff off camera. I'm not going to, for example, video my character creation. I'll mention it a little bit, but I will just talk you through the decisions that I make, and we'll get in some gameplay for sure by the end of the video. At some point, I'm going to do a video on principles that might be applied when selecting what rule set to use for doing a solo RPG situation, but this isn't that video, so I'm not going to really get too much into that. But I did find, well, first of all, I wanted to do something sci-fi because I haven't done that for the channel yet, and I love the concept here of the fact that the world here is one, and this is where the title comes from. I said I didn't like the title, but it is certainly thematic to the world, that there are things have happened in the world where there are these giant space hulks out there. Some of them are empty spacecraft, desiccated worlds, and excuse me, within them there are various monsters and horrors, and so that's where the title comes from. I like the concept of ruins and things to explore. Obviously, it's a trope that is very much within fantasy, but I like this concept of putting it into space. And there are also quite a few tables here, random tables, D12 table. I don't know actually that, here's a D100 table. As I said, I have not looked through this in huge detail. So some of what I'm doing is going to be my own exploration of the system and just showing you what I pick up that I use and why I make those choices. The basic system here to create characters, I think it's a 3D6 system, and we are going to be, yes, it's a 3D6 system. We have, this is very, very basic in terms of what the stats are. You can see them here. We have strength, intelligence, wisdom, dexterity, constitution, and charisma. And there are some various modifiers to them. I'm going to skip over all of this simply to say that typically for me, when I look at a new system, what is interesting to me is I feel some affinity toward a character type. It might be a race or a class depending on the system. And in this particular case, what I felt the affinity for was, as I often do, was the scientist here. And so I will be having a scientist as a main character. I think I'm going to go with two characters. When I'm doing something solo, I typically am going with up 1 to 3 characters. And the reason for that is because it enables narrative moving forward to have different perspectives and characters that complement each other. One video I am definitely going to do in the future is going to concern itself with addressing the question that I get often on the channel and in my email about how do you get unstuck when you do something solo, because you're generating everything, and sometimes you can get into a situation, it happens to me too, where you're maybe using some oracle to answer questions and it's like, yeah, but so what? Well, one of the ways that is helpful is if you have fully developed more than one character and that they complement each other and have different roles within the story. But in any case, for here, I think I'm just going to start with two. Maybe I'll bring in another one. I find myself often when I do these things, particularly off camera, but I've probably done this on camera too. Who knows why? Maybe in my own psychology, having one or two people searching for somebody else, and the other person is a fairly developed character. They may come in different scenes, but it seems to be a narrative I go back to time and again. In any case, I'm going to have a scientist. The other thing that drew me here, there are psychers here, so these are people that have powers of the mind. I'm always drawn to this type of character, but I'm not going to do that here because I find when doing something solo, this can actually get you into trouble when you have a character whose main event, as it were, is to try to glean the future. That really works well with a GM. It's a lot harder to pull off, I think, by yourself. However, what we've got here are, we have some, let's see, let's just go back to the beginning. There's human classes and there's alien classes. I'm going to play, in addition to a human class, I'm going to play this hovering squid. This is an alien class. Now, I was drawn also to this Omega Reticulan, but this is essentially another science character, and I want to have a science character and then basically a soldier character. Now, I suppose I could make my soldier character the human, and then I could get the science character, the Omega Reticulan. Maybe I'll do that. I'm going to do that. I'm going to take my soldier is going to be the human, and I'm going to take my alien is going to be my scientist, because this is interesting to me. They have a color-based native language. They're an amoeba-like race hailing from a world with very thin methane atmosphere around thick layers of surface ice. Not unlike some of our Galilean moons, etc. They're the oldest of the 4 known sentient races still extant in the galaxy. They tend to be naturals with science and technology and are especially skilled at bioengineering owing to their unique physiology. Societally, they are a technocratic race valuing intellect and scientific achievement, and their leaders are among the finest minds on Omega Reticuli. Each character comes with some general structural elements here, favored weapons, what their armored is, what their favorite environment is, their abilities and such, as well as various modifiers to attack values depending on their level. When I play solo, I often start out with level 3 characters. Why? Well, for one reason, it gives obviously more options to choices, whether it's spells or weaponry or whatever. And for another, it allows for differentiation among the characters a little bit more specialization that can occur. You'll see that here, as elsewhere, I'm going to gloss over certain rules about leveling up and other things that are details that I don't need for my story that I'm telling. What I'm always trying to do when doing something solo is to drive the narrative with a feeling, with an emotion, with a desire. That is what's motivating the story. Many times the details of rules do not contribute to that. So for example, am I worrying about or concerning myself with experience points necessary to get to another level? No. There's going to be an achievement perhaps at the end if I'm going to run these characters again. If they've satisfied the goal, their reward is a leveling up. It's very abstracted and it is sort of rules generic. It doesn't go with this rule set or any rule set, but that is the way that I play. Moving on here, we see that the Omega Reticulans, who is going to be our science character, all have access to unique tricks or powers through their various talents, and they are explained here. I'm going to choose these off camera, and what I will do when I develop the characters is, again, to try to complement them and to take different attributes and skills. The fighter's not going to have access to the science skills anyway, but I am going to try to have my characters complement each other. For equipment, same situation. We're going to be rolling 3d6 times 100 credits to purchase equipment. Now, here, this is one excellent example of how I streamline rules to make them work for what I'm doing and not to get too much weighted down, as it were, pun intended here, because what I tend to do is ignore weight limits. I don't want to spend a lot of my time figuring out, am I carrying something that is above my weight value, which has something to do with players may carry on their person an amount of weight and gear of strength times 5 pounds. Well, I'll have some sense of what that is. It's a very easy calculation, my strength times my weight. So, I'm not going to let somebody carry like 4 micro rocket guns, which are going to be, let's see, what is the weight here? Well, that was the cost. Anyway, 40 pounds each if they are a character that's very weak. But it's going to be very general. I'm not going to necessarily do that calculation. What I am going to do is I'm going to stick to the money amount. Of course, you can get as detailed as you want. Where I stop doing the details, where it stops being enjoyable to me. So some people may disagree with that, but you're playing solo. So my rule on this with solo is to be consistent within the story that I'm telling. And in this particular case, I'm going to consistently not pay too much attention to the weight. I will look at it and try to more or less approximate something that makes sense, but it's going to be thematic rather than a specific calculation. So I'll choose my armor and other weapons. Again, this is going to happen off camera. Now, we come to the details, character background and such. For a type of rule set like this, I'm not going to go too much into detail on this. The background and the history of my character is going to arise out of the environments that we generate, and the environments that we generate are going to start to propel what story I have. And well, what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that in this case, we are having the opportunity to create the galaxy, the worlds in which we are traveling. And we see back here, let me just mark my spot. We see back here that we have a sector claim map and details. We are going to be rolling up various planets and planetary objects that we could potentially travel to, and we're going to have a system map here as well. And in this case, I'm going to do that before I actually even decide on what my characters are going to do. Now, you may say to yourself, well, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense because you're creating a world and then you're putting characters into it that have something to do just based on that world. That doesn't seem to make a lot of sense, especially the way the book is organized and the way many rule sets are organized. You've got the characters first and then they're in the world. In this case, I am going to use the world to help me generate an idea for a story that's going to allow me to manipulate the characters and work with the rules and have them actually do something. Because again, when doing something solo, you need to be able to move the story forward. There has to be something that is propelling the story beyond just you. And in this case, what that is going to be is the environment. So let's take a look, and we'll finally get to start to roll some dice here. I am going to move to the spaceships. I'm not going to create my own spaceship. What I am going to do is put my people, who haven't even been developed yet, into a spaceship. And there are some examples here of spaceships, and here are some sample ships. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's 8 of them. So let me get a D8, and I'm going to just decide that they're going to be in one of these ships. All right. We rolled a 4, and we will take a look and see what 1, 2, 3, 4 is. It's a planetary liner, class 4, whatever that means, and here are all of its stats. It has some add-ons here. It has short-term seating, interesting, and some crew stats, etc. There's going to be rules always that you're not using, and one of the rules here has to do with cost, because there are different ways of purchasing ships or renting them. What I do in this case is pick up something that to me has the beginning of a story. And what that is right here is this short-term seating. This is a planetary liner. Maybe it's a transport ship. I don't know. I do know, and if you've watched my Starfinder video, you'll know that something similar came up with this, where there was a rule here, and it's right here too. This is in Starfinder, and it has it here too. Something on additional rooms and storage. So this is an explanation of what the short-term seating is. Airline-style seating. Each unit can carry up to 20 passengers in lack of comfort, and then some variables here. So our ship has that. It also has other things: a shuttle bay, artificial gravity, an automat. Let's see what they say in a shuttle bay. So we've got a shuttle, okay, and the automat, let's see. Inspired by 20th century cafeterias, the automat system presents a wall of self-restocking processed foodstuffs, heated to order by pushing a few buttons. Tastes of sorrow and bachelorhood. Well, that's funny. Usually I don't like humor. That's actually pretty funny. Includes 2 months supply. Okay, so this is a transport ship, clearly, and this may suggest something to us. It potentially could be a story note. So I'm going to make a note of this in my section on narrative. Now, I'm going to call this, for right now, narrative hooks. This is going to be things that I'm going to reflect back on when I am trying to figure out what I'm doing here. We've got the short-term seating, and we have the automat. So this is not only a transport, but maybe it is a ship of casual transport, of non-fighter, non-combat oriented transport. Maybe it is a festive type of ship. We're going to call it, it's a liner. So that to me suggests something that is also like fancy, an ocean liner. I don't know what the class 4 means. I'm going to check on that. Maybe that will have some narrative suggestion to me. So my Omega Reticulon and my, how to spell that, and my fighter, my scientist and my fighter find themselves in this ship. Abstracted here, there's going to be people running this ship, there's crew. I'm not going to be doing, doubtful, I'm not going to be doing any type of space combat, but I've got the stats here if I want to pick them up. Otherwise, I simply ignore them. There's something very cool about this system. There's a lot of detail about exploration, and I showed you in the back here, there is an application for the Galactic Guide of Surveyors, application for membership that has to do with how much exploration you do. That's all great, and it's enjoyable to read. However, it's not for me. The aspect of it that is for me here has to do with lost claims become open season for treasure hunters and looters. So again, we are traveling through a galaxy where there are these floating objects that may be open for us to explore. They may be devoid of any enemies. They may be full of enemies. We don't know, but this is going to be something to do with our story. And so I am going to be skipping over all of the rules about joining the guild and getting a claim, but simply picking up on some of the information that I can use to generate my own story. I'm making note of this table, Subspace Mishaps. I don't need it yet, But if I do find myself in my story going from, say, a planet to a planet, I'm just going to call it a planet. It might not be a planet. It may be a floating space hulk or whatever, but place to place, I may incorporate this into my story to see how that works. I'm skipping over all of this sector mapping that is here. Maybe I'll come to the star names if I want to do, there's a nice naming table here that I could use, and it gives you options for names if you want to name them after a constellation or favorite figures here, various things. But skipping over that for right now, what I'm going to do is I am going to this star type table, and let me just, sorry, I thought I was in frame. I'm going to just do a roll here on this is another D8 table to see what the star is going to be, or a star is going to be for wherever I'm going. It's a 2. It's a neutron star. They're incredibly tiny, just 8 miles across, but extremely dense. The remains of collapsed giants who've gone supernova. Neutron stars are dim, but still provide some light. However, they provide great amounts of radiation, and their systems generally contain large amounts of nebular gases left behind by the original star. 1% are pulsars and emit high volumes of radiation or radio waves at precise, regular pulses. Interesting. The first star in a system is always the central point in a system, and the second star is orbiting, etc. So we've got a star. It's a neutron star, and it is tiny and dim. I'm going to make a note of that. I'm putting this in the narrative hook area. Why am I doing that? Because I have not yet decided whether or not this information is going to be of relevance to my story. It is what I rolled, but I may just ignore it if it doesn't work for my story, or who knows. But this is my tiny and dim neutron star. I guess that means that whatever I find is going to be cold. I don't know about that. We have a roll here on terrestrial planets, and it looks like it's a D10. So let's see what we may find initially here as a planet. 3, Hell World. Well, great. Dense clouds of CO2 gas and sulfuric acid, massive volcanic activity, rivers of flowing lava, hydrofluoric acid rain, searing solar heat. Whatever the cause, these places are incredibly inhospitable, with temperatures in the hundreds of degrees and air almost certainly toxic to most life. Anything living here is not likely to be friendly or easy to kill. And then it gives us some stats. So that's not great. Now, is this a place we are going to? Is this a place we are leaving from? I don't know yet. Maybe it's a place we're leaving from. Maybe it's a place we're rescuing passengers from to try to take them somewhere better. That's a possibility. I don't know. Is there a gas giant in our system here? Could be. Is there a dwarf planet? Could be. There's going to be a dwarf planet here. Why not? I'm a fan of the dwarf planet. That's a D6. And let's see what we get for a dwarf planet in our system. A 2. Frozen world as the terrestrial world. Well, that makes sense because it's a tiny dim star. Would be frozen. And let's see. Here's the frozen world. Harsh worlds of frozen liquids. They may be rocky with a thick layer of ice, a snowy tundra, or a layer of constantly shifting and cracking ice. The worlds are often inhospitable, but some life does sometimes survive, often under the ice or in permafrost regions. Omega reticulans come from such a world. Interesting. All right. So in our galaxy, there is a frozen world also. And our scientist, we're starting to need a name for this fellow. Our scientist comes from this type of world. Maybe he's trying to go back home. Maybe he's escaping. I don't know, but that's significant. And I'm going to note down here the page number in case I need these details, page 77 for that. And my Hell World description is on page 76. Now, you'll notice I haven't taken out any character sheets. I'm not, this is just, as I said, random notes here. I'm not even mapping out these things. I could do that. It's sort of cool, actually. But these are, what I'm doing now is simply writing down the narrative hooks. That is a combination of random things I've rolled up, but also some specific narrative overlay or narrative direction that I'm providing simply by the fact that I'm picking and choosing among the options here. So the choosing that I'm doing of what I'm focusing on and what I'm ignoring is part of creating the narrative. So I'm not just I'm getting things that are going to start to form into some sort of story. And the reason why is because I'm doing editing before I actually roll on anything. Now, let's see, what do we have? We have belts. I don't think I'm going to deal with that. I need to be more specific. Let's check out, there's going to be a deep space station, a massive sentient built station set in orbit around their star. Let's see what the purpose of the deep space station around this star is. It's a residential station. All right. Home to hundreds and even thousands of spaceborne residents, a warren of former homes in space. So what is this telling me now? Well, let's write that down. What this is telling me is, page 79, initially we are talking about some travel, some short-term seating, some passengers. We've got this, one of our main characters is one of his home world is part of our system. And now the station that is going around the star has to do with residential matters. So already we're starting to see things coming together, and we are starting to see perhaps a narrative of maybe this is a journey home. Maybe he is bringing somebody home. Maybe he is getting someone from home. I don't know, but this is where we are. Now, let's see, artificial worlds. These are ancient, well, these are bigger structures. We may come back to this. I don't know that we need this right now. The moons, I think I'm going to skip over that. And let's see, the ancients were incredibly clever scientists and colony builders, checking for ancient habitation. Now, this is ancient, is this on our planet? Let's see. Well, we have the hell world here and the frozen world. Well, let's give them a history. Why not? Why not? And I don't know whether it's going to come into play, but I'm going to roll on this table. It's a D10. I don't think, yeah, here's the D10. And let's determine for this hell world here, the hell world, which is the first world out of this dim, small star. What did it used to be before it was a hell world? Well, it used to be a monument. The planet was once inhabited, but some long-forgotten catastrophe wiped them out, leaving only strange monuments behind to commemorate their loss. Further habitation is likely buried beneath centuries of overgrowth, erosion, and earth. But who were they? What sort of ancient beings were they? Okay. Table 27 on the following page offers some options for DM wanting to add a little background. Okay. Roll on as much or little information as you desire. All right, so our hell world was once inhabited. We're going to write monument here. I need to write this page number down because there's a lot of information here that we're possibly going to come back to if we go there. There are strange monuments commemorating, and let's see what table 27 has to offer. Oh, okay, interesting planetary details and the prior civilization. So, let's see, I'm not figuring, how does this table work? Maybe this is just the actual type of civilization that there was. I might skip over this, but perhaps some planetary details. This looks actually more like the contemporary planetary details. Let's go back to the frozen world and see what's the history of this frozen world. So we're back to table here, step 5, determining prior habitation. And whoops, that rolled. All right, I'm going to re-roll that so you can see the entire roll. And another 10. All right, I'm going to re-roll. One more time. Oh my goodness. Wow, I just rolled 4 10s in a row. 3. All right. Underground base, a particularly popular alternative. Can you see this? No, you cannot. Sorry about that. I'm trying to mark where I am, but a particularly popular alternative to surface dwellings for those facilities that desire either secrecy or protection from a hostile surface. All right, so it's a frozen world now. It used to be an underground base. Well, I suppose that makes sense. If it's a frozen world now, maybe it was never that great to start with. Our star has been dim probably for a while. Page 81, I don't know how evocative that is, but this is the home world of my Omega Reticulon. So something that is very important in any narrative, but for the purposes of this video, in a solo RPG narrative, is the links that you create between and among different characters, different environments, and different events. And here we always must remember that the Omega Reticulon scientist is connected to this frozen world. Why do we need to remember that? Well, if we are into our story and we're coming up against a block where nothing's going on, this connection may be something that can pull us out of a roadblock in the narrative. And if it comes up, we'll see that. But it is always important to create these links and remember them when they happen. And if, in fact, if I was making this in a way that was sort of neat and tidy, I would perhaps write this down in say red, and write everything concerning this down in red, because to show that they're linked together. So the next thing we're going to do is go to table 28, which is a list of these little details that we might want to add in. And we're working again here in our system with we've just got the two worlds. We've got our star, and we've got this hell world and this frozen world. And we also have the residential station that is going to be orbiting this star. I am going to give a couple, well, you know what, maybe I'll wait on this and see where we're actually going to go. I'm going to wait on this. This table is going to be significant, clearly, because it is very specific to the planet if we're on the surface of the planet. But I'm going to leave that here because we're still working pretty macro, and I don't want to get distracted by that. So what has to happen now is to take the information that I have generated for myself in what is in essence the first part of what I do when I create something, which is pull out the narrative hooks that I'm going to use to create my story. Then I need to set up my actual characters to put them into that story, and then we will get going with the actual adventuring and the story. Off camera, I followed the character creation rules. I did random rolling. I just decided which character I was going to be starting with, and these are the stats. I put down the asterisks here to indicate per the class of character what the highest stats were meant to be, so that when I had my rolls, I just placed them appropriately in that regard. I did also random rolls for how much money they have. They didn't do so great on that. And these are just some notes from the rules as to some of the benefits that they get, like a +3 melee to hit for this fighter. Now I started to give these some thematic concern. So rather than a fighter, this is going to be a security specialist. He's a human security specialist. I think he's probably some type of basically private security guard for this Omega Reticulon, who I've determined is an archaeologist. That is his specialty as a scientist. And so this all kind of went along just regularly. Then I went to the purchasing area. Well, actually, first, my scientist has this specialty where he has this kind of abstracted device that can aid him in his research or things of that nature. And there's a mechanic in the rule set that I'm going to stick to that has to do with how many uses he can get out of this thing before it needs to be recharged. And the recharge has to happen every 8 hours. I don't know yet how I'm going to do the timing. I've spoken about timing issues in other videos. I am challenged with ways of keeping track of time and whether I do it and how. I do want there to be some pressure placed, some rule game mechanic pressure placed on how much I can use this thing, or else there's not going to be any challenge involved, any moderation of am I running out of time, can I continue to do something, or choice making. So I need to stick to that to some extent, and based on the rules and his level, etc., he has 6 charges of this thing. He's got this limited number of science programs. There's a skin graft, which is basically a repair program of healing, and I can't I can't make out my own writing here. I did this a couple of days ago, actually, what that is, but it looks like it also heals damage. Now, then we went to the store, as it were, and we did our purchasing. I did keep track of the money that I spent. As mentioned earlier, I didn't concern myself so much with the weight of items. This is where I was not that familiar with this rule set at all when I started, as I mentioned, and it was at this moment that I felt a little bit let down, or concerned that there wasn't the depth of material I was hoping for, because what was available to me essentially has to do with combat, some basic combat things, some healing things. I got some grenades and some first aid, some sort of abstracted compound, a torch, but I didn't really have, say, for example, with this archaeologist, which was a subspecialty suggested as a possibility by the rules, I didn't really get thematic options of equipment to buy and things like that. So I'm not sure how I'm going to fix this as I move forward. I may end up needing to deviate further from this rule set than I had anticipated at the beginning. I was going to try to stick as most as I could to it. And in fact, well, I have deviated already, and you can see here on the next page, I have picked up a set of what I'm calling social skills, social skill values for my archaeologist and my security specialist. These are drawn from, if you watch my social combat video, you can get an explanation of how this is going to work in the game. This is from the Dallas RPG. I have picked up stats from some suggested characters in that RPG that approximate, this is some type of science character stat, and this was some type of heavy man, basically. I want in my adventure there to be more than simply just fighting, and more than simply just I open this up, can I figure out what it is? And I'm going to get to that through the use of this. How am I going to do this with NPCs? Well, I have stats that have been worked up from that other game that I'm going to apply to characters, basically lay on top of characters I encounter, and we'll see how this works. So I have assigned stats for these values: power, persuasion, coercion, seduction, investigation, and luck. And it's going to be a mechanic that I bring into the adventure to give it a little bit of depth and to add to what is existing in Hulks and Horrors, which wasn't quite enough for me to do what I want to do. Dr. Hayes Trilon is a galaxy-renowned archaeologist scientist, sent as a last hope by the people of planet Perisphere to try to find the missing component to the atmospheric converter that will save their world. Without it, the mining corporation that has a monopoly on environmental manipulation machines, known as EMS the galaxy over, will take over this last independent planet. He travels with a lone security guard, a young human named Mo, who is devoted to helping Dr. Trilon keep the people of Perisphere independent and free from the monopolistic corporate lifestyle of the rest of the galaxy. The first thing I like to do when I'm actually starting, after the prep work is done, is make sure that the first action is something that is from a random table. This gets me started, and it makes me feel as if I am at the whim of fate. And the other point I want to make about doing this kind of stuff, I don't have a lot of minis or accoutrement for this. I wish I did, but I just don't. But one of the things that I do, I wouldn't say collect, because I don't even have that many dice, but one of the things I'm on the lookout for when I go to game stores are dice that, usually from a dice bin for like 10 cents or a quarter or whatever, that I feel could add to a story or a theme. So when I'm doing something sci-fi, I'm about to make a roll about flying. I choose one that I have that is thematic, and it's a really inexpensive way of adding a little scaffolding for you into your adventure. So there you have it. There's a table in Hulks and Horrors, and I'll show it to you in a moment, that is the space mishaps table here. And this is what I'm going to roll on to start. It is within an exploration segment that I'm not necessarily using, but I just want to get some sense of what's going on and give myself a random way into this story. And I rolled a 4. Wrong system. The ship becomes lost, and instead of arriving at its destination, instead pops out in another nearby system. So right away, this is kind of thwarting us a little bit and letting us know that whatever we're doing isn't necessarily what we planned. Let's see where we're going to go. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We've got 8 options, so we'll find a D8 and we'll roll our D8 and see where we're going to go. We are going to 7, map 7. Let's see what that is. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Is that 7? That's 7. All right, map 7. We are going to look down at the terrain key here and see we've got an alien city here. We've got an alien structure or structures here. This is liquid. We have a submerged cliff, some heavy vegetation, light vegetation. It's a little hard to see. I think that's over here. And an abyss. Where's the abyss? The abyss is up here. This is the locale we're investigating, and I'm going to figure out a way of randomizing where we come in, and we'll roll up some atmospheric effects and things of that nature. So we've got some possibilities here with this alien city and some alien structures. A D6 and a D8 is going to give us our landing spot here in this place we didn't think we would be. We rolled a 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So we're coming in on 0504. It is a liquid, it's a place of liquid, and it's one spot over from the alien structure here and here. Actually, that's pretty good. A point about scale, and also, as long as I'm talking about it, I'll talk about the issue of time. I abstract this significantly in anything I'm doing along these lines mostly, and I also, it's very elastic. So, for example, if I would decide that this scale would be a scale manageable by, say, some type of spacecraft, and actually apply, there are terrain effects here from this existing game, and actually apply that and have assigned movement values to myself, I could do that and walk around or move around and have all that have an effect. On the other hand, this particular hex could represent miles and miles and miles across if I wanted to. This is not something, at least for what I'm doing right here, that is going to be of significance in the game. In other times, in other games or other things I've done, it maybe would be more significant. And I think, I'm thinking back to my Ironsworn little adventure, I think there was some significance there to the amount of travel. So some of it comes from the rule set, some of it comes from the story that I'm generating. That is definitely one of those fluid measures that when I am doing this kind of thing, I don't spend a ton of time worrying about. The issue of time passing is something different, and I mentioned earlier that one of my characters here has some device that needs to be measured by time, and the reason that has to happen is to create some tension in the game to foster a narrative moving forward. If I just had somebody that was walking around anywhere they chose with some device that allowed them to do anything they wanted. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, I suppose, but it doesn't impose the choices that I am looking for when I do something like this. I want my characters to be in a situation where they either don't have enough time to do something, or if they do this, we know they can't do that. And when we get more into this shortly, I'll show you at least what I'm trying to work out for this little series here is going to be that mechanism. But for the time being, we have landed in a liquid hex. We are looking around, and I think in the distance we're going to be seeing a couple of two different structures, and let's find out what they are. This urban ruins table is going to tell us what we're looking at and possibly what is inside it. We look south and we see a long rectangular structure, and what is that? That is a library, and we're also going to roll on the flavor table to see what that is. So we've determined now that this structure right here is a library. It may be abandoned, it may not be, and now we're going to see what this T-shaped structure could possibly be. The T-shaped structure is a courthouse, and we see that it has some contents that we can loot. So I'll make a note of this and decide what we're going to do. Here's the beginning of some sort of map. Now, again, with map, I also will change the scale a lot. This is just merely my way of taking notes, and I'm going to be rolling on some tables to generate some flavor text for the library, and these tables will be in here, and then we were going to get to that courthouse and loot it, or at least a loot table will roll on there. Of course, we can do whatever we want. We can decide that we will be looking around at detail. We can be looking around for people, whatever. It's an open slate, and I think this is where sometimes things can go off course, that once you start to get away from the scaffolding and the structure of rule sets and the story that you've created, it can get a little loose. And I find that to keep moving forward, getting to something that is very concrete is the best idea, and then branching out from there into seeing where the story takes you. Well, of course, I'm going to have them investigate the library first, and if you knew me in real life, there would be no question as to understanding why. In the rule set here, I went to the urban ruin flavor table that my D6 roll suggested I should, and I'll say quite frankly, I'm not going to roll on it. I don't like it for this. It's very limited, and it doesn't give me, most of the results here are just not, they're not thematic to a library, what I'm doing. So moving away from this, what I'm going to do next is I've gone to my own resources, my own bookshelf. I immediately thought of two of them, and here they are. This is a book called The Library at Night, and this is a nonfiction book about libraries, and this is a novel called The City of Dreaming Books. I'll put up the publishers on the video. I just happen to have these books. This had nothing to do with RPGs. If you watched my video on ways to be a solo GM, which is the current trailer video on my channel, you'll see there's a segment of it where I talk about using non-RPG materials when you need to. And making their way through the liquid ground, our adventurers find themselves facing a two-story structure. The lower side appears wider and the second story much smaller. From the side, it looks like a hat. There's a peacefulness around. It is dark, with less than 10-foot range of sight. The outside of the building appears to be lit with something, indicating a most sophisticated atmospheric control planet-wide. This must be one of the so-called illusion planets, where life is simulated so externally that it feels real, like Earth was supposed to be. Droplets of moisture are visible in the air. This is a fine touch to the simulation. Our adventurers wipe the visors of their suits, and the vapor actually moves. The air is still and cold. There is the smell of burning wood in the distance. We're going to see what we get from here. There's 455 pages in here, so we will hope that we get in range, and if not, I'll just re-roll. So this is going to be my hundreds, and shouldn't get 55 out of that. Whoops. 347, page 347. This is amazing art in this book. Amazing story in this book, actually. Ooh, well, that's cool. That's on page 348. Exile to Darkness. It's always great when you start. It's always great when you start on some chapter in this situation because it gives you hopefully a little something. I stood there without moving and got ready to die. There was no point in trying to escape from such a monster. It would only have prolonged my agony to no avail. Homunculus had lured me into his murky kingdom with revenge in mind. I was to die on behalf of all who had done him an injustice. He bore down on me with the calm self-assurance of a mighty predator that knows how futile it would be for its quarry to run away. His face had a certain bizarre beauty, even if it was the mask of a monster. His nose, lips, and ears were composed of skillfully assembled layers of paper. Even his teeth consisted of jagged pieces of parchment, possibly stiffened with resin, judging by the way their golden tips glinted in the candlelight. Most terrible of all, however, were his eyes, just two black cavities where the eyeballs should have been. I saw now, too, that he did not consist entirely of paper. His shoulder joints, elbows, knees, hips, and neck were coated with a brownish, elastic substance resembling leather. Of course, it was leather that held the pages of a book together. So it was only natural that the same should apply to this creature. After traveling this long amount of space to find themselves in front of this structure, which is a library, Dr. Trilon and his security specialist, Mo, need to do a constitution check to see whether they have incurred any constitutional damage during the amount of time that they were traversing this planet. We have to do a constitution saving throw, so rolling at or below our constitution stat. So for Dr. Trilon with no benefit, he's got to roll a 10 or less to pass that, and he rolls a 10. And for Mo, he's got a +1, so we'll get that benefit to his roll. Let's see if he can do that. Excellent. So none of them take a hit to their constitution. Had they done that, we would have given them a 24-hour penalty on their constitution stat. And this is a good opportunity for me to talk about how I am keeping track of time in this game. I need to keep track of time here because of this device that Dr. Trilon has, which will allow him to, let's take a look at what we've got. Well, first of all, it's going to give ultimately a +3 modifier to an intelligence roll, that is to gain information, to do investigation, things of that nature. And he also has a healing skin graft program in it, and he's got a heat ray in it, which does some damage. If each of these cost a charge to use, and he has to recharge it after use every 8 hours out of every day. So in order to actually make this have some restrictions on it, time has to be passing. So the way I'm going to do it for right now is simply to roll a d6 after every sort of set of actions that are taken. Again, this is unscientific, but to roll a d6 after every set of actions that are taken and mark off how much time that would have passed. And when I get to the end of 16, if I haven't used these charges, I have to wait for 8 more hours to pass. When the 8 hours is passing, I'm going to be rolling a d4 for that passage of time. Why? Well, I want to elongate the time that we cannot use this benefit because I think it will add a little more challenge. Does this make sense? Is it linear? No, but this is how I've chosen to do it. So that is what I'll be doing to mark the passage of time. And in this case, that situation would have had 6 hours of time passing. Walking through the doors of the library, our adventurers see scrolls and writing implements all around. They enter an octagonal room whose walls are lined with books and scrolls. In the distance, coming out of the shadow, they see a creature, and he's... So it's time for us to have our first encounter with somebody outside of our party. And I've done a couple of things prior to getting to this point, and this is to set up the situation and to give me the resources to deal with it. The first thing is I've examined the chapter in this Hulks and Horrors book to see how many monsters there are, and there were 39 of them. I eliminated one of them from my count. I eliminated basically the zombies one, because first of all I wanted 38 to choose from, and I'll tell you why in a minute. And also I just didn't want to deal with that theme. It's too much. It's too much outside of sci-fi. Didn't really examine the rest, but I've got 38 monsters to choose from. The other thing that I did was to set up the additional social combat values that are going to be assigned randomly to the creature that I encounter. I divided them up prior to starting of play based on the attributes that they have into what I consider to be sort of an average or lower level NPC, a bureaucrat, or just a regular foot soldier, depending on the circumstance. Something that is more specific, you might think of it as mid-level, or something that's more of a purposeful encounter. So if my party, say, is going somewhere to do something in particular, and they encounter someone who's involved in that particular thing along the way. And then finally, something here which would be either, you could think of it as a boss, it could be an institutional type of thing like a bureaucracy or somebody in charge. So I've divided this up, and these cards all come from the Dallas RPG. That I have made these up prior to this play because I use them in other circumstances, and you can see them again in that social combat video. So the first thing we need to do is figure out who we're going to see, and the reason that I wanted to have a choice of 38 is because I can get a value from 1 to 38 by rolling the d20, the d12, and the d8, and my lowest value is going to be 3. My highest value will be 40, but that is going to map out to choice of 38. So I'm going to roll these and see who we see. So we got 13 and 15 is going to be 28, which is going to map onto the 30th monster in this book. So let's go take a look and find that monster. 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, and 30. We have encountered the skinless. Among the most unfortunate victims of the plague are the skinless. Barely contained, roughly humanoid assortments of exposed meat and organs, the skinless have the appearance of one somehow flayed alive, and their constant moans and wails suggest this experience leaves them in near constant pain. Shambling, awkward, and easily injured, the skinless are well aware of their limitations and tend to take a stealthy approach as best they can, often preferring to ambush their targets, the better to expose them to threat of strangulation rather than direct confrontation. Its behavior is going to come in as opportunistic, and I didn't mention this earlier, but at the beginning of this monster chapter, there is a it's not a table so much as a list of what the associated behaviors are, and we see here opportunistic, behaviors. This is a general descriptor of the monster's behavior from one of the following classifications, and it also provides a modifier to morale checks involving that creature. I don't think I'm actually working with that. We have opportunistic here. The monster will not immediately attack unless it feels the party is weakened and will make for an easy meal. So what this is telling me is that we're going to go to some type of social combat interaction as opposed to some defending interaction that is specifically combat related, because we're not being attacked here. Had we encountered somebody, monster, with a different type of behavior, then we would have responded accordingly. So for example, well, they could have been docile, but of course we could have encountered one territorial, a stalker, savage, and then a killer. So there were options here for that aggressive behavior, but we're clearly encountering someone who is perhaps even in need of our help. And so we will proceed accordingly. Stepping out of the darkness, a timid creature approaches. It keeps to the shadows wherever possible, and it is almost difficult to discern the difference between this creature and the walls and structure of the building itself. It doesn't have hands, but it has some almost gelatinous appendages, and as it moves into this dusky light, we can see that it is cradling an object. Moving even closer, we see that it is an artifact of great value. It is a book. Well, what we want to try to do here is talk to this fellow who clearly is probably the librarian of this institution, who's carrying this book. This is a very rare item these days in the world, and I guess we'd like to find out some information about maybe what this is, what this creature is, why he is here. And before we can do that, we have to see, can we persuade the creature to tell us something about the circumstances? And so to do that, what we need to do first is figure out what their values are in these factors. So we're going to draw the top card here from the lower level NPC deck. We're going to ignore anything that this says. I have, as I said, previously sorted them. What we're looking for here is simply the persuasion resistance value, which in this case is 7. And we're going to have our, let's see, let's refer back to our own stats in this area to see what we've got. The archaeologist is the better persuader, as you would think makes sense, and he's got a value of 17. So the way this works is we take our own value of 17 as against the second value here of this character, which is a 7. This is the resistance value. We subtract them, and in this case that leaves a 10. If the value falls between 2 and 12, we have to see whether or not we can succeed. If it was 1 or less, we couldn't succeed at all, and if it was 12, we would have an automatic success. But we're in the range of having to see whether we can do it or not. We need to roll 2d6s, and we have to roll equal to or less than the spread, basically, in order to be successful. And then we can determine if we are successful, how successful we are. So we need, on these 2d6s for a success, to roll 10 or less. So let's see. Whoops. Let me get a decent place so you can see this on camera. And we roll a 3. So that's a pretty strong success with a 7 points under. We got a strong success here, and we are indeed going to get some detailed information about what this artifact is and or who this character is. And this is where now we're going to move off into figuring out, answering yes and no questions, perhaps using an oracle to try to determine perhaps what type of help this character might need, whether or not there is anything else to be discovered in this library, perhaps whether this character knows something about the other building that is here, the courthouse. And this is where you have to reflect back on the larger story to see where you want it to go. For the purposes here of this video, I think this is where I'm going to end. I hope that what I've done here has given insight into kind of behind the scenes of how I create a story, how a little bit of a world is created, and how characters can be given a narrative structure that then evolves and changes due to the mechanics that you choose to use from your rule set and due to your own imagination.